What if failure wasn't who you are, but just something that happened? Too often we carry failure like a tattoo on our identity, when in reality, it's just an event on the timeline of our life. Because events pass. However, you last. In today's episode, we're breaking down how to reframe failure so it fuels growth instead of defining you. Failure. No one wants to fail, but failure is an event. It doesn't define you. I failed at many things. I've gotten fired from a job. I've dropped out of grad school. I've been rejected from asking women out. I've made mistakes playing in golf tournaments. I've missed opportunities with jobs, and the list goes on. I'm a human being. I've fallen down, but I've learned to get up over the years. You are not your mistakes. Yet failure is the thing that often discourages people from trying new things. We often find employees in the workplace conforming to play it safe as they're so afraid to fail, afraid of the consequences of not doing the supposed right thing. It even causes adults to be afraid to play, as they don't want to look silly. They think that playing is for kids. We learned how to ride a bike years ago by falling off and getting back on, and those days are over, supposedly. No more time to fall off the bike, nor time to get back up. Adults are therefore supposed to be perfect. They have this idea of perfection. In the book Laughter Yoga, it is quoted that children laugh nearly 400 times a day, while adults laugh less than 15. Now, that's pretty scary. And the point, though, is that kids don't look at failure as negative. They're typically laughing it off. They see what they're doing as learning. They are more likely to laugh no matter what they are doing throughout the day. Meanwhile, adults don't want to laugh as they never really step outside of their comfort zone, hence the pitiful statistic of adults laughing. However, it is through failure where progress is made, because failure is an event, it does not define you. So today in the Work Sucks But I Like It podcast, I want to explore failure and discuss how to properly view it as immediate feedback. I prefer thinking of failure in terms of immediate feedback because one, it's more positive in nature, and two, it's an antecedent to a flow state, meaning one of the requirements to get you into the zone, meaning it's one of the requirements to get you into the zone with your work. You've heard me talk a lot about flow in the show, those moments when you're doing something and you're in the zone, as they say. And I'm pursuing my PhD in IO psychology right now on this as well. Now, people sometimes see me as this high achiever and have labeled me as hardworking, which I guess I am. But I attribute this perception of hard work as simply being able to manage the immediate feedback on what I'm doing. I see too often people so afraid to do anything because of the fear of failure that nothing gets done. More time is wasted trying to, what I will call, mentally prepare themselves, instead of just jumping into the task at hand with great vigor and enthusiasm, not afraid to fail, but knowing it's just part of the process. But I want to make clear that this isn't arrogance. It's not about being cocky that you won't fail. Rather, it's this key difference that I've realized over the years that failure, again, is this immediate feedback. How I respond to failure, this immediate feedback I've been given when doing something. They call this an autotelic personality in psychology, how they are so motivated by something that they can even turn a potential failure into part of the journey and lessons in growing. This is so important because the quicker we can accept this immediate feedback, the quicker you can get to your goals. And when you think about it, you would rather fail early on and learn from it than wait until the end of doing something and have the project come toppling over. But it starts with a mindset, which surprisingly not many people have when you start to hear what words they're choosing to speak with. In golf, as we know if you play, the object of the game is to get the ball into the hole in the fewest amount of shots, to avoid the hazards and play the ball as it lies. I've actually played with golfers who shank a ball into the water and indicate shortly thereafter that they knew they were going to do that. Yet, as we know, that isn't the goal of the game. This mindset I see often in the workplace. It's a negative attitude, it's an excuse, but it all revolves around this fear of failure. So afraid to not hit the ball into the water, they end up hitting the ball into the water or doing the wrong thing and not realizing the potential of growth in that immediate feedback to do better the next time. Let's start with defining the word failure so we're on the same page. Failure means a lack of success according to Google when you type it in. A lack of success. But what is success then? Success, according to Google, is the accomplishment of an aim or purpose. So from that, it's clear that it depends on how you define success. What is your aim or purpose in the thing you set out to do? And that is where we're going to start our discussion today, because experiencing failure is different than actually being a failure. First, I want to explore what is called an origin story from my realization of experiencing failure. An origin story is about looking back on a significant event while you were growing up and realizing this sort of had a lasting impression on you to this day? Mine around experiencing failure was when I used to play on this travel soccer team. We practiced at a park in Nashua, New Hampshire, where I grew up, and I even remembered the parents turning on their cars at night so we could use the headlights for a few extra minutes of practice. The team was driven to be the best in the area. I was young, I don't remember the specific age, but I remember the team I was playing for, International FC, Football Club, obviously not American football. Our coach was Brazilian. He was once a professional player himself. He expected a lot from us kids. And it was one practice where we were taking shots on goal, and I got actually called out for how, what I will say, pathetic my shot was. I experienced failure in my mind. Why? Because according to Google, failure is a lack of success. I was not being successful like my other teammates who had better shots than I did. I was being called out for my shot while they were not for theirs. Now, the details of how I responded and whatnot are long but gone from my memory. But what followed has been told to me by my dad, which I've appreciated over the years and has allowed me to reframe experiencing failure to immediate feedback. When I got home from that practice, something clicked inside me. There could have been many ways in which I could have responded. I could have blamed the coach for being too hard on us. I could have blamed, the headlights of the cars being distracting. I could have blamed the soccer ball or my cleats or the ground. But the one I picked was that I was determined to get better at my shot and soccer. Who knows all the forces involved? But my dad indicated it was my decision in the end. So fortunately, my dad saw this in me and understood how important it was for me to do this. He built a wall in the backyard so I could practice my shot. And outside I went, practicing my soccer shot at night and on the weekends. My grandfather even painted a goalie in the middle of it from one of my soccer trading cards I used to collect to simulate the real game. I was determined to get better. I practiced the mechanics of laces on the ball and even building up my technique of coordinating the planted foot next to the ball. And later on that season, my shot did get better. I would soon be taking some of the free kicks and corner kicks for the team, but it was because of a pivotal event that happened to me. I failed. I failed at what I was doing, but it didn't have to define me. I could have gone home and maybe cried. I could have gone home and said, I don't want to play soccer anymore, but I didn't. The kid in me then wanted to work at this, and the adult in me now looks back and smiles as to how I responded to failure. So if you haven't thought about your origin story in terms of work ethic, I recommend you do it. It's fun. Ask your parents or family about yourself growing up, or read into your journals if you wrote them. And if you don't have one, that's okay. And even if your story has a different outcome than mine, that's okay too. Because even after that event, I don't let it define me per se, as I need to keep redefining myself every time I fail, even to this day. It's not a one time thing. Because what failure or immediate feedback really is telling you is that you need to either pivot on where you are or persist in the direction you're already heading in. I needed to persist that day into working the soccer shot, to keep going and to get better. But I've had times where this immediate feedback has actually forced me to pivot or change directions altogether. When I got fired from the job years ago, I had to pivot and find another job. There was no persist because I literally got fired. And because of that origin story of soccer, I look at failure today like really trying to fit a puzzle piece into a puzzle. It takes some attempts to move it one way, this piece that you're trying to fit in, then another, then you set it to the side. Maybe get the corners and the edges all lined up. And the immediate feedback or failures being that really the piece just doesn't fit. Sometimes you have to pivot and move the piece to another area instead of the one you're working on. Other times you have to persist knowing that, you look at the color scheme or the particular design and you kind of sit there in that area and you try to make the puzzle piece fit. Maybe it takes a quick look at the photo on the box, stepping back and seeing the bigger picture of something, and then analyzing the piece once again to eventually find where it goes. It was no different with how I practiced taking shots in soccer in my backyard growing up. The puzzle piece of how to angle my foot, the area to place my standing leg next to the ball. I even got creative with it and started working on how to curl the soccer ball one way and then another and being more skilled than just kicking it straight ahead. And this leads to an important thing about failure. We need a safe space to fail. Just like you have a relatively safe space for your puzzle when you build it, meaning you can lay out the pieces and fear that they don't get knocked over or, like my cat does, come and sit on them and screw them all up. But where do you find these safe spaces? Where do you create them? Sounds like really another podcast episode, as my second book, Life as a Game, Work or Play, dives right into that. But for this episode, most people think that they need to go to social media. And I want to argue against that. And why do I even bring this up? Because that is where everyone is supposedly seen playing these days. We go to YouTube to learn how to solve a problem, but these aren't the most ideal of spaces. That is because these videos and content are already polished, act out perfectly. The creators have done the work of learning from their immediate feedback behind the scenes in their true safe spaces. So online can be misleading, despite the comfort it gives you of the funny YouTube fails of people playing sports or doing stupid things. Also, online can be both great and pretty brutal. ESPN top 10 highlights on one channel and YouTube fails on another. It shows the entire spectrum of good and bad, if you will. So, this is where it is critical now to have failure be just an experience, an event, and to not let it define you. And a professional tip here, a skill for you, is to differentiate the status of online with your real world today. Not be so attached to what everyone else is doing and measuring your own success based on theirs. Be inspired by them, but influenced more by your own actions. Instead, use online to inspire where you are. But then carve out in your backyard a place to practice your shot. Don't record it. Make space in your office or computer to start working on that book or doing that drawing. And again, don't record it, just do it. The space is about the practice. Even in the yoga classroom where students go to practice, don't record that. Most studios today say don't bring in your phone anyways. You shouldn't. Go and practice there. If you fail or fall in a pose, you get back up and try again. We need to still learn how to get back up from falling on our bikes, if you will, even today. We're so afraid to fall, though, because we have this fear that we could go viral on YouTube for our failures. I shared in another episode my experience of being fired from a company. And so there was one failure there in some sense. And that I was told once in a job interview that I actually was a failure for dropping out of grad school when I was working on my master's in material science engineering. And I'll admit, when I compare being fired and being, told I was a failure, that being called a failure really stung at the time. Here, my whole life, I was working hard and doing the things I thought were right. So, of course, in that interview, when this man said I was a failure, I defended that I wasn't a failure and went on to highlight other things. But this person was so convinced this event defined me, I was going to fail in the future. And he wasn't wrong. I still fail today at certain things. But failing at something falls on a continuum, and it's all just part of the process of learning. It isn't just summarized as failing so bad you get laughed at on a YouTube channel. Instead, failure indicates a critical marker for where you're at in the process. It is the feedback in relation to the goal you want to attain. For example, if you want to hit a golf ball in the hole 450 yards away on a par 4, but it takes you 6 shots to get on the green because you hit the ball in the water after saying you knew you were going to do that, well, that's a level of failing. If you miss your par putt on the next hole because a squirrel runs and grabs the ball from going into the hole, well, that's a different type of failure altogether there, too. I used to actually play competitive golf years ago. I earned MVP in high school and played varsity for 3 years. And my best round for 18 holes was a 1 under score at a course that has now been run over by Amazon distribution center. And out of high school, I actually figured and thought I could try and play at college, a D1 level. UConn was where I went to college for undergrad to study material science engineering. And I didn't know what material science was, but I knew that I wanted to try and play golf as well as get a degree in engineering. So I went to the golf tryouts. Now, for you golfers out there, my GIN card had me around a 4 when I was playing a lot. And what that basically means is that in a given round of 18 holes, I averaged around 4 over par. So if ideally the score of par is 72, I would typically shoot a 76. Not bad, as most golfers today can barely break 100 if they played in accordance to the rules. However, to play D1 golf, you needed to be way better than what I was. So in tryouts, I shot my usual scores, while those around me were shooting par and subpar scores of 72 or lower. And remember, in golf, a lower score is better, right? We don't want higher scores like we do in basketball or soccer. Needless to say, I didn't make the golf team, but it was eye opening to me. It was an event. At that point in my life, it made it clear that even though I failed to make the team, it was not a failure and that it made me realize I needed to focus on my degree of material science engineering. It was a chance to pivot, and I still enjoy playing the game even though I had to go pro in something other than sports. And I would say earning my Bachelor of Science in Material Science Engineering was pretty good. Anyone who makes it through Professor Brody's Transport Phenomena course and doesn't crash Excel using finite element analysis for diffusion of atoms in solids is a winner. But then there was that time when I did earn my Bachelor of Science and decided to take on a master's in material science engineering. Now, at the time, it was 2009 when the economy tanked. Jobs were hard to come by, and someone fresh out of school like myself with no experience had little chance of finding any job. So, a professor of mine decided to take me into his group and do some research. We built upon my undergrad capstone project of looking at the effects of recycled aluminum 356 alloy with iron buildup that was causing these called deleterious phases in the microstructure to decrease properties. Basically, there was crap in the metal, and I was trying to see if a certain process called HIP, hot isostatic pressing, would get rid of this crap by basically smashing it up with elevated pressures of around 15,000 psi and temperatures nearly zero point 0.9 of the melting temperature. And to give you an idea of the pressure, I'm going to approximate the conversion here. You're experiencing around 1 atmosphere of pressure as we speak or as you're listening to this podcast right now. And this process of HIP multiplies that by 15,000 more or less. Think of little argon atoms smashing into at high speeds and smushing into a more dense solid. That's hipping. So here I was doing research, loving the studying of the Arrhenius equation for diffusion, and going to first principles to further understand the effects of pressure on the diffusion of iron and aluminum, building it up from the ideal gas law. Basically, I saw that iron was being the sort of villain in the story where we wanted the hero, recycled aluminum, to win. But it was one day on my quest to save this recycled aluminum when I was doing the preparation of the microspecimens where something clicked in me. A sample I'd been polishing slipped and fell down the drain. Other than the key words I used to scream at the plumbing gods, I realized in that moment I wasn't cut out for this. I didn't have the patience for this. Every day after that, I dreaded the material prep and laboratory work of these samples. I wanted a different track. And at the time, I was dating someone who was graduating around this time and was from the Midwest. And our relationship was good, and we decided to take it to the next level and move in together. In this case, moved to Ohio, and so I dropped the program. And after I dropped out of my master's program, I actually went on to this company to take over for the senior quality engineer in a matter of a few weeks, then went on to become a process engineer for a new startup project, and became a manager, eventually managing literally millions of dollars each month for a certain department. These events have defined pivotal moments in my life for sure. I also went through good and bad experiences with relationships, and they've all taught me many valuable lessons along the way. I look at them though as immediate feedback that I needed in those particular moments. Because you know what? In the grand scheme of things of what we call life, we don't know whether or not something is truly good or bad that happens to us. And that is where we're going to head next. Because let's face it, this culture today thrives on people failing and things being negative. But as you will see from the story I heard years ago, we don't know whether some things are good or bad. So the story goes like this. A young man gets a horse. He's all excited, and he tells his neighbor that this is the greatest thing that could have ever happened to him. And the neighbor simply looks over and says, "How do you know?" A week goes by, and as the young man is having fun riding the horse around, the horse, while playing, accidentally flips the man over and he breaks his arm. He screams out in pain, "This is the worst thing that could have ever happened to me." The neighbor hears this and one day says to him, "How do you know?" As the young man gets his arm in a cast and looks out the window to see his horse running around and wishing he was back out there, there comes a knock at the door. He walks to open it and sees an army officer recruiting for the upcoming campaign. And because of his broken arm, he can't go. The point of the story is this: you don't know whether something is good or bad. Shakespeare tells us that thinking makes it so. Your thoughts label something as failing or succeeding, and the quicker you can get over making mistakes, the better off you're going to be at succeeding. I didn't know that me quitting grad school would open up new opportunities in my career. I didn't know that being told I had a crappy shot in soccer would make me want to practice harder and have one of the best ones on the team. I didn't know that making mistakes in dating and in my relationships would help me even understand more about myself and what I was looking for in life. People today are too focused on what something will look like when they try it. They're afraid to fail to the point where they don't even want to do it, instead of jumping right into what they're doing and fumbling and learning as you go. This comes down to another key mind shift we need to make on how we internalize failure. Like I mentioned before, it's immediate feedback, not failure. But this is tough when you have family and friends that might not see it the same way as you. We need to go from afraid to lose to excited to win. In golf, I remember learning about having a short term memory. that if I hit the ball in the water, I can only focus on my next shot. It's the same thing with immediate feedback. Just like in golf, you can only play it where it lies next, except at the bottom of the pond, of course. Unfortunately, you have to take a penalty shot there and drop in the designated area. So when you're doing something and making a mistake, have a short term memory and do the next best thing in that given moment to get the task done successfully. To enforce this, when I was playing a lot, there was an activity I used to do after a round of golf where I had a journal and would document all my good shots, not the bad ones. I wanted to remember the good ones, not the bad ones. So one day, my brother and I actually extended this activity to where we write down three things each day for what we're grateful for. And we talked about this in episode 11 if you want to check that out. It was a cool episode and interview him. And every night for years now, we text one another these top three things of our day. It was there that I realized actually how well my brother manages work and life, as he indicates family and work in one of those three things every single day. He focuses on integrating his family and the work that he does, despite when I catch up with him with the immediate feedback as he's telling me about his running his business with the failures and whatnot. And we do this at night because in our minds, it helps to positively reinforce these things before we go to sleep. That way, when we wake up, we feel grateful and can take on the day. Sports athletes do this so well when it comes to handling failure. When they lose a game, they say more times than not that they're going to practice harder for the next game or train harder during the off season for next year, focusing on what they can control, focusing on the positives of what they're doing. I love that. They could blame the referee, they could blame their teammates, or blame the fans, or blame the field. But the great athletes who seem to win all the time are the ones constantly saying they're always trying to improve. They learn from their mistakes and grow. Another thing I like from my days of competitive golf is taking this anticipation of fear when it comes to failing, aka you get the butterflies when you're nervous about something, and trying to really get these butterflies flying in formation. These butterflies of being nervous or thinking you're going to fail are always going to be there, and it's more a matter of having them fly in formation instead of flying chaotically around. My girlfriend showed me the other day a video of a famous Broadway singer who has a specific routine before each show to overcome his nervousness before he goes on stage. He's getting the butterflies flying into formation. One thing that is sometimes overlooked is how critical it is to surround yourself with the right people. I've heard this, and I don't know how valid it is, but I think there's some truth to it. But you're the average of the five people you hang out with most. Think about it. If you're hanging around negative people, you're most likely going to be negative. If you're hanging around people indicating that it's not going to work, you're going to start believing it's not going to work. But when you hang out with people that want to win, that want to succeed, well, that is a recipe for success right there. But of course, it's hard when you're considering the people that are closest to you when they're friends and family. And over the years, I've been able to refine my techniques with handling this. And it basically comes down to expectations, even with, close relatives and family members and whatnot. What you expect of the other person, whether it be someone from your family or a stranger, comes down to asking the question, why do you assume they will think that way? This is critical. I don't walk a day in their shoes, so I try to see it from the other person's angle. I don't look at their social media posts to understand them. I ask the questions of why they are doing what they're doing. As you can see, failure has a lot of how we react and respond to something. These are always going to be plenty of things we can blame externally, but those sometimes are harder to change, the things outside of ourselves. If we want faster results, we need to start working on ourselves, on the things we can control. When I was running marathons, I knew that motivation was not permanent, but I had to keep telling myself that it was, that I had to keep persisting through the immediate feedback of my legs hurting or my mind wandering as to when I would cross the finish line 26.2 miles later. It's so easy to give up. It's so easy to just not even care. Even if crossing the finish line is sloppy, like in one race where I was so tired and my form was so bad that I was chafing and bleeding all over the place, to the point where I actually, when I crossed the finish line, had to go to the medical tent right away to get treated. So you might be thinking now that if this immediate feedback or failure doesn't define you, what does? What should define you? Well, it starts with how you think about this failure in your life. Do you blame others? Can you start seeing the problem from your own angle? And yes, sometimes there are things out of our control, like losing a family member or a close friend, But the mentality still is the responsibility of ourselves. Whether you choose to respond or react is going to make the difference when there are temporary setbacks. I think what defines me today is my integrity. But it's taken me all these events of immediate feedback to get here. I have to admit, there have been things that I've done or not done that I do regret. But like I mentioned before, we don't know if something is for good or bad in the bigger picture of our lives. Maybe being rejected from that cute woman behind the lunch buffet was an okay thing back in college. Maybe getting fired made me a better manager. I think the world we live in thrives off of people failing. It makes us feel good that we aren't the only ones. It's no surprise that, again, YouTube failure videos are such a sensation and why we gravitate towards such dark and depressing news and TV shows about hurricanes and shootings and people failing. So remember that success is not a matter of good luck, but good skill. Today, the skill is simple. When you fail at something or get immediate feedback, what do you then do next? Do you persist or do you pivot? Do you see this event as something where you can grow from and not let it consume you to prevent you from doing the next thing? You're not your mistakes, because these events will pass. And remember, you last. Thanks for listening to the Work Sucks But I Like It podcast. If you like what you're hearing on the show, please hit that subscribe button. If you learned something today, please share it in a comment or review so the community can all benefit from your immediate feedback experience. If you want to know more about your song and dance in life and your true values, check out my first book, The Impression of a Good Life, Finding Your Song and Dance. And with that, we'll see you next time. Thank you.
We're nowhere, America. I can feel the heartbeat I'm singing. We're nowhere, America. Still a place that I